Hey, welcome back. Before we begin with the video, I'd like to talk about a very serious issue that's been on my mind for quite some time now. And being that I am in the Simpsons community, I couldn't help but engage in the conversation. Basically, there's been this ongoing argument of whether Homer Simpson is a good husband or if Marge deserves him. And obviously, the Simpsons fandom is so big, you have people coming from both sides, some defending, some who absolutely hate him. So I decided to face the argument head on. I decided to do a little social experiment. And I went undercover. That's right, I went undercover to reddit.com, a place you should definitely not be in. Now, Reddit basically has these things called subreddits. And one of them, and I'm going to slightly censor the title, but one of them has people basically get advice on whether they're in the wrong in the situation. To paraphrase the title, it's Am I the Jerk? And I decided to go undercover there as Homer Simpson and see if people will think that what Homer did in whatever situation I chose for the subreddit was right or wrong. And I think it made for a pretty good segment. See for yourself. We're here at reddit.com and we're gonna make a Homer Simpson account, which I bet hundreds of other people already did. So making the username is going to be a tad bit difficult. But if we just change it up a little bit, because Homer Simpson, let's say 2025, can spell 2025. Does that work? Wonderful, it works. Of course, the password, I'm not going to show it on screen. So I'll see you in the next bit. Uh, Look, check this out. This app has a section for sports. Like anyone using this app would know anything about sports or playing sports. All right, so we're here and we're gonna make the post as Homer Simpson. And basically, I'll be using the plot where he bought the baseball. No, wait, the bowling ball. Where he bought the bowling ball for Marge for himself. And I'm gonna basically ask if I'm the one in the wrong or if Homer is the one in the wrong. Obviously, um, we'll see what happens. We'll see. Come on. Okay, so we're done with the post. I didn't write much, just this little bit of info, and I'll post it and see what happens. Well, it seems like the app has automatically deleted my message, so it seems that we won't be getting an answer. What a shame it is that we won't be getting the advice of people who have not showered in the last 7 days and who use this app frequently on a daily basis, night, day, and afternoon. So basically, nothing came of this. It was nothing. It was not a fun experiment. And now let's get back into the main video. It's all about the Treehouse of Horrors, and there's a brand new star system that I've introduced. So check this out. Across The Simpsons' long run, it's had a lot, and I mean a lot of anthologies. The series' favorite type of episodes probably are the anthology stories, evident by how many times they utilize them. But their favorite type of anthology, and the only ones that have seemed to stick around, are the Treehouse of Horrors. Now, the explanation to what those are goes without saying, but I'm going to explain them anyways. The Treehouse of Horror stories are Halloween specials consisting of three 7-minute stories. Now, you might think this is some typical review of them, and if you thought that, then you're wrong. These specials are Halloween specials, as mentioned before, but being that they are from a comedy show, the focus isn't always on the scary aspect. Which begs the question, which ones of the specials is the scariest? Which ones fully take advantage of the Halloween vibe? Now, for this video, we'll be going through the 7 Treehouse of Horrors, from Season 2 to Season 8. Not that the later ones aren't good, but perhaps we'll judge the teen seasons on their own later. Now, how we'll be reviewing these will be a bit different than the regular 1 out of 10 scoring, because we'll be going off my custom star system, where each episode will be reviewed in 3 categories. Because there's 3 segments, 3 categories, it fits, and it will be stars instead of numbers. That's how you know how unique this video is. It's really inspired. You're not gonna see stars on Real Gyms or Simpsons Theory. You're not gonna see that. Anyways, anyhow, or anywho, let's get to the three categories. First in the three categories is atmosphere, which will basically be the vibe that the episode gives off. I'm not actually exactly sure what that entails, but it'll make sense as we go along. The second out of the three categories is horror, how scary the episode is. And because this show is a comedy, and while we're trying to see which episode is the scariest, the third category will be comedy, because I feel like there needs to be a little comedy in a Simpsons episode. But I don't think that a Simpsons episode needs to have comedy. That isn't mandatory. Like Al Jean, who ran the show after season 10, showed that off really well with season 18 or season 19. That was just a little zombie Simpson joke. Okay, so now that you've become familiar with the system, let's go ahead and start with Treehouse of Horror 1. Starting off with the first Treehouse of Horror of the season, appropriately dubbed Treehouse of Horror. It isn't even called Treehouse of Horror 1, just Treehouse of Horror. I guess they didn't think they would make more, or maybe they just forgot. Who knows? Anyways, this episode, or Treehouse, already gets a step above all the other anthologies, as it is actually set in a treehouse. That's right, the Treehouse of Horror is set in a treehouse. This might be the first and only Treehouse of Horror where that is the setting. I find that so cool. Why did they stop doing that? They should have at least changed the name to something. You can't have 35 Treehouse of Horrors where only one is set in a treehouse. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't even make any sense!
Okay, so back on topic. Back on topic. If we're gonna judge this based on atmosphere, horror, and comedy, again the three categories, then this special gets us off to a great start, especially in the atmosphere department. Let's start off with the first segment, Bad Dream House, which, unlike the other segments, isn't a parody of anything. Strange to start this very parody based series without a parody. This segment's plot is The Simpsons moving into a brand new house that turns out to be a spooky, haunted house. Hence the title, Bad Dream House. It gets straight into the spooky house stuff too. I like that because it's from Bart's perspective and he's telling the story, that the segment's pacing is kind of all over the place, kind of like this video. And it's more edgy, spooky scenes than joke heavy scenes. There's still some great jokes here, like Marge's
I'm in the kitchen, Homer!
but most of the segment is focused on the spooky factor, and it accomplishes that really well. The segment is fully set at nighttime, with the Simpsons family at odds for the most of it. And by at odds, I mean they're trying to kill each other with knives and axes. And their voices here are very calm, collected, not like the loud and obnoxious, in a good way, takes of the regular episodes, and combined with the music, give this segment a great vibe. The segment does still get a lot of comedy points because of the house's voice. I always thought his line deliveries were so goofy, like he's meant to be this scary threat, but talks like an angsty teenager. I think that's so funny. A well rounded segment all around. Before we head over to the next segment, we have to discuss the wraparounds, which I discussed briefly earlier. If you don't know what those are, wraparounds are the scenes that act as a sort of connection between the segments. The later scenes don't use them as frequently, which isn't a complaint. I know that anytime someone compares the later seasons to the earlier seasons, it's negative, but really just a simple change. And while I prefer the wraparounds, they really didn't add much, and removing them gets you straight into the plot. But hey, it's cool that the wraparounds take place in a treehouse this time. It won't add any points to the episode, but it's pretty cool. The next segment is a Twilight Zone parody, starting off the era of Treehouse parodies. And wow, do they start off well! This segment has a UFO be summoned on top of the Simpsons house that takes them aboard, where they meet three aliens, with the only two with names going by Kang and Kodos, who we will see a lot of much later down the line. To begin, the atmosphere is top notch in this episode. I don't know if the voices of the characters count as something that creates atmosphere, but I'll count it because it's my video. But the aliens give off such a creepy vibe. You really believe that they are gonna eat the Simpsons. And the implication of Lisa slowly finding out that they are supposedly fattening them up to eat them creates a very eerie horror mood and changes how we view the aliens. and the comedic punchline with the space dust gives a funny twist. It's probably for the better that they went for a more comedic end as opposed to a more scary end. I also find it really funny that both these segments have the Simpsons exiled from someplace for being themselves. It really hits home that the only people who can accept them is each other. Now on to the last segment, The Raven. This is a deeply inspired parody, no, adaptation of the Raven poem by Edgar Allan Poe, and what is probably the most atmospheric segment on here. The Raven, while lacking in the joke department, delivers such a well done retelling of the poem, with the animation, the voice acting really pushing it to huge heights. It's probably the most clever Simpsons segment they've done, and it doesn't at all come off as pretentious. There isn't much horror or comedy to speak of. There's some, of course, but it's really carried by its atmosphere. Dan Castellaneta, or I don't know how to pronounce his name, voice of Homer Simpson, also acts as if his life is on the line. It's some of his craziest voice acting yet. I know in the Dreamhouse segment I said the more calmer voice delivery made the episode more realistic and creepy. Well, I take it back. Homer's anger in this episode sends chills down your spine. It's genuine distress and hate towards the Raven, but it is mostly carried by that atmosphere. So now off to the star score where, as previously stated, we will review the episode based of three categories and using stars because stars are cool. The atmosphere of the episode I would give about 5 stars. I think for their first Halloween special they really wanted to show off and do something really inspired and atmospheric, and they really succeeded in that. The horror I would give 3 stars out of 5. Lots of scary scenes, but nothing overly scary. It's fairly tame, but there's still some spooky stuff there. Now the comedy. This is the complicated one, but I think I'm gonna give it 3 stars as well. The episode was obviously more focused on showing off their chops in horror writing more than comedy writing, which makes sense for their first Halloween special, seeing as they wanted to make it distinct from the regular episodes, which are all very humor based episodes, as you might expect from a comedy show. So, having finished with the first Treehouse of Horror, let's move on to the second one. For the second Treehouse in the series, how does it hold up in the three categories? Well, to begin with the atmosphere, it's pretty much gone, at least the atmosphere of the first one. The first one went all out in terms of setting it apart from the more normal traditional stories of the show. It really did feel like a Halloween special, while this has the atmosphere of just a very high concept episode of the show, which isn't a bad thing at all. But sadly, it's pretty obvious that they didn't care all that much about making it all that atmospheric, at least compared to the first one. The only segment with any sort of atmosphere is the segment Homer's Nightmare, where Burns and Smithers, during the dark and grim nighttime, place Homer's brain inside a robot. The night sky graveyard combined with the crude drawings of the characters, this was when they were starting to experiment more with drawing the characters in more outlandish expressions, giving this whole thing a vibe reminiscent of the first Treehouse, which is very high praise. This whole episode leans more into the comedy angle, with that especially being obvious with the first segment, Lisa's Nightmare, which is filled to the brim with jokes right out of the other normal episodes, like, or some of the other outcomes the monkey's paw gets them into. So, getting into how all three categories, and yes, this section was much shorter than the first. In case you have not yet realized, I am completely unaware of how to structure a video. That upset me for nearly a minute before I spotted a video titled How to Take a Frog Off a Nintendo Switch with 500,000 views. I quickly returned to my cheery demeanor and continued writing this video. So, as we were saying, the categories, to remind you, are comedy, atmosphere, and horror. Starting off with comedy, as it is the strongest aspect of this episode, they've sort of already got a bit too comfortable with the concept, to the point where the episode gives off the feeling that they really didn't want to push the envelope in any way. It's very, we need to get this done because it's a yearly tradition, which is a bit weird for only their second entry, which doesn't mean it's bad, it's probably better than the first. I'm just saying that there's a clear shift in feel between the first and the second. But to focus in on the comedy, the jokes here land really well, And they deliver a bunch of great one liners, quotes, and catchphrases. Can't really expect any less from this period of the show's life. Does any less mean good or does it mean bad? I've always thought of that, like, any more. I can't expect any more from the show. Does that mean I don't expect it to be good? But then what does any less mean? Well, basically I expected very high things from the show and it delivered. That's how I felt. So, I'm gonna give the comedy 5 stars. It really delivered on everything it needed to do. The atmosphere, on the other hand, was fine mostly. It gives off all the basic Halloween feels that you want from a Halloween special, but after the first one, it feels so underwhelming in vibe. I know that's unfair and I should judge it separately until we get to the actual ranking, that is. But the atmosphere is pretty interchangeable from the regular 22-minute episodes, except for the burn segment. That one was good. And what else? I've always loved pretending to not know what comes next in a video. I always loved when YouTubers do that when they're like, what else? What comes next? As if they don't have the entire script written down. I've always wanted to do that, and I'm doing it right now. So, what comes next? Horror. I'm gonna give horror 2 out of 5 stars, and I didn't write down. It seems I didn't write any notes down for why I gave horror 2 out of 5 stars. So we're just gonna move over to Treehouse of Horror 3, which is really good. And yeah, we're gonna see what happens. Okay, so we've reached Treehouse of Horror 3. This one has a similar story structure to the second one, where 3 characters tell a story, not in a treehouse, by the way, I know it's a shame. And it's kind of the opposite of the last one, because it sort of trades the comedy for the atmosphere. And look, I feel like I have to preface most of these are not like the first one. So when I say this is scary, it's gonna be in a more tame, light way than it was for, say, the first one. Because I'm being like that one gif, you know, that gif of the roller coaster moving when there's something that's not actually scary. You know, I hate that gif. But it's kind of like that. That's how you should take this video and like the topic. This is an animated show and horror isn't as scary when it's animated. So as we were saying, the first segment is the crusty doll segment, which traumatized me for years. Just the idea that there was this little doll that you can barely see that's always out there trying to get you, no matter how much you hide or attack it. It's just a very creepy feeling. I wouldn't say the segments got all that much in terms of atmosphere, but I think the horror is really effective, at least for me. The second segment is told through Abe's point of view, and it's a story about King Homer, who is an ape. And it's told through black and white, and it's a parody. The aesthetic of the segment alone gives it a lot of atmosphere, although it isn't very scary. It's a little boring, even. It's just atmospheric and kind of cool, but it isn't very funny or scary. The third segment is where it all meets together nicely. The 3 categories, that is, the classic zombie horror segment. You've seen it a bunch of times, and The Simpsons really put its own spin on it. The comedy is great, with jokes like, and the atmosphere of them being out at night in a town filled with zombies is great. And the horror is, you know that one gif we discussed? Yeah, but it was still kind of scary. The Simpsons going around when all their friends have been turned into zombies trying to kill them? That's scary. So, the atmosphere I'm going to give 4 out of 5 stars. Horror is 3 out of 5 stars. And comedy is 4 out of 5 stars. Now on to Treehouse of Horror 4, what is most people's favorite. Treehouse of Horror 4, what is widely considered the best Treehouse of Horror. But whether it's good or not doesn't really matter, cause this entire video is about judging it based on 3 categories. Sorry to repeat myself, but it'll help you remember. This episode has 3 really good segments that shine in all of the categories. Let's start off with the first segment titled The Devil and Homer Simpson. Now, this one is obviously more so focused on the humor, as this is from season 5, where things began to become very absurd, and by now the Treehouse of Horrors had stopped being so much Treehouse of Horrors and more parody of the year. The segment itself is a bit lacking in atmosphere, But what it lacks in atmosphere, it makes up for in humor and horror. Now, you probably don't remember the segment as all that scary, but I always found the devil's demeanor to be quite eerie. It's funny how just giving the devil, who is the manifestation of evil, the mannerisms of Ned Flanders, the manifestation of good, and how mixing those two makes for such a creepy outcome. The devil's cheery outlook at the face of Homer's mortality really makes for a mix of funny and scary. And of course, there's the Homer eating an endless stream of donuts and actually enjoying it somehow, which makes for a good mix of the two. Segment right after is a Bart segment where he thinks he saw a monster outside the school bus. You know, the typical character thinks they saw something, but it actually isn't there. Love those tropes. Of course, starting off with the atmosphere, it's great. You're left wondering if Bart really did see that monster gremlin thing. It's more of a lizard, but it also looks like Homer. I don't know exactly what it is. You can probably look it up if you're curious. But the idea of not knowing if it's real or not, and if it will come for Bart and the other kids, does leave you constantly on edge, wondering when it will show up. There's also the scene of it holding the dismembered Ned Flanders' head. That's scary. The horror goes right with the atmosphere. They complement each other really well. And that is totally not me attempting to compensate for not fully knowing what the categories I set in place entail. The third segment, Bart Dracula, is pretty much the same as the second in terms of comedy, atmosphere, and horror. They mix all three in a satisfying way. The drawings in this segment are also really nice and complement the atmosphere really well, and the comedy is tight. You can tell this is when The Simpsons' humor was at its absolute peak, which will be the case for the next few treehouses, or like this one and the one after. So let's get to the star system. Comedy, I'm going to give 5 stars. It's season 4 humor, The Simpsons at its best. Atmosphere, I'm gonna give 4 stars. Excellent and really engrosses you in the horror segment. And the horror, I'm gonna give 4 stars as well for the same reasoning as the atmosphere. Now to head over to the next treehouse, which is Treehouse of Horror 5 for season 6. Alright, so if Treehouse of Horror 4 was the new hope of treehouses, then this is the Empire Strikes Back of them. Just like the previous treehouse, this one expertly mixes atmosphere, horror, and comedy in a way that feels satisfying to watch. First of all, you have the shining parody that reminds me a lot of the first Treehouse's Bad Dream House segment, and that is very high praise, as that one was really atmospheric, and that entire Treehouse, as we've discussed, is probably the best Halloween special of the bunch. But this one feels like not only a sequel to that, but an improvement over it. Homer trying to kill his family is done so well in a way that doesn't feel overly dark, but not overly goofy as well. It's great. The other great segment that is mostly on the comedy side this time is Time and Punishment, which has Homer traveling through time and changing the course of history. Him ending up on a world controlled by Flanders is very funny, but it also has the same thing the last one did so well, presenting Ned as a villain but keeping his mannerisms the same. It really shows off how something so seemingly innocent could be so horrifying if you just put it under a different context. Lovely, clever stuff. Next segment is Nightmare Cafeteria, which is absolute nightmare fuel, with a goofy concept again being combined with horrifying implications and ideas. You have the school attempting to eat all their students, and it's really atmospheric and scary, and there's great scenes here. The horror is also top tier, the blender at the end being especially scary. So, for the star system, I'm gonna give the atmosphere 4 stars, the comedy 5 stars, and the horror 4 stars, just like the last one. What we have next is Treehouse of Horror 6, which is somewhat of a downgrade from the previous one in some ways, but we'll see for ourselves now. And of course, to remind you, this is all based on my weird categories. The episodes themselves are really good, even if they don't fit some criteria about being scary or not. This is all for this video. They don't need to be scary to be good. So moving on to the final treehouse of this video, we have Treehouse of Horror 7 for season 8. The final one on this list, and it's much better in terms of living up to the three categories than the last one. The first segment features Bart's secret evil twin, who was separated at birth. I think the family having someone living in their attic, hiding it all this time, really adds to the eerie, creepy atmosphere, and makes the whole vibe really scary, especially knowing the Simpsons were somewhat aware of his existence. So Lisa or Bart could have just stumbled upon him at any time before now. There's also some great comedy with Hibbert hitting the empty window gag. The second segment is more of a sci fi concept than it is a treehouse of horror. It feels very Scully in its execution. Scully being the era from season 9 to 12 for the people who don't know with us in the room. The third segment I found to be really boring, but it does still have some great jokes, not much horror or comedy. So, to give the final score point to the final treehouse, I would give all three atmosphere 2 stars, comedy 4 stars, and horror 2 stars. And now we're done with all of them, finally. Okay, so obviously, since this is a star system and isn't your ordinary scoring system, it's not really possible to rank them from scariest to least scary based on the points we've given, but if I had to pick a scariest, I would most definitely pick the first one. It's a really good mix of horror, comedy, and atmosphere. You can tell they tried just a little harder than usual to make it just right, to secure the tradition for another many years. Okay, so thanks for watching. This is great. And watch out next time for a video about the 3 episodes Conan wrote for the show. But before we finish, I need to show you a sneak peek for another video, a sequel to this one, where I rank the Elgin era of Treehouse of Horrors. Here, take a look. Okay, so now on to the Treehouse of Horror number 17. A bit of a controversial one, but after careful consideration, I feel it belongs on the S tier. Yeah, that feels right.